What's the scariest moment you've encountered in your whole life? Posted one day ago. Please do like, share, and subscribe. I used to live near a large open stormwater drain with no fencing around it. 3 drunk guys drove their car straight into it. I went out and found the driver trying to get his friend's foot out of the windshield. On the field on the other side of the drain, I saw a third passenger who was covered in blood. I asked if they were okay, and my neighbor called the ambulance police. The blood-covered friend passed out and was twitching, so I ran to the car, grabbed a towel from the back seat, and ran to help him. I found a large, deep cut on the back of his neck or head. I rolled him to his back and used the weight of his head to put pressure on the wound. I was talking to him, trying to keep him awake, and he went into shock, twitching and unresponsive. This was the moment I thought a man died in my hands. I was able to wake him, and the ambulance took over from there. That was the most harrowing moment of my life. Got stopped 3 times on one night by a Mexican drug cartel while I was driving through the middle of nowhere in a pitch-black midnight. Seeing my dad collapsed on the floor and my mom panicking and crying trying to call an ambulance, then seeing him die. He was clinically dead for just over a minute there on the floor and be revived by the EMTs and be carted off to the hospital. He later died a second time and could not be brought back. I was 12, and I'm the one who called all the family members while waiting for the ambulance. I'm the one who had to tell my grandma her son might die. Doctors inform me that our 2-year-old daughter has high white blood cell counts and is likely an indicator of pediatric cancer while wife is traveling for work. Have to go get additional blood work and wait days for results. Turned out she was fighting some bug and is healthy, but that precious few days was the scariest time of my life. My younger brother sleepwalks. He would just stand by my bed, silently, until I'd snap awake and see his silhouette looming over me. Sometimes he turns on the lights when he's sleepwalking. I woke up one night and he was standing there, turning the lights on and off, on and off. I get him back to bed, and I went downstairs to sleep for the rest of the night. Around 4 a.m., I woke up to see all the lights downstairs were switched on. That moment you know you're going to be in a near, possibly fatal car crash, and there is no longer anything you can do to avoid it. So you close your eyes and await impact. And so much happens in that moment. It's like time stands still, then it stops, and you survived, and you're cognizant, and you look around to assess the situation, look down at your mangled self. It's been almost 25 years. I blocked a lot of it, but I can still see all that blood on my hands. I used to be a mountaineer, and I was on an expedition on Aconcagua, the tallest mountain in the Americas. We were at Camp 3, around 6,000 meters in altitude, and set to push for the summit in the morning. I'd been feeling a bit nauseated and sluggish that day, but nothing too alarming. But I woke up in the middle of the night and something was horribly wrong. My head felt like it was split open. I couldn't stop vomiting or dry heaving, and I was talking gibberish. The world was upside down to me. I felt overheated, even though it was approaching minus 50 degrees Celsius with the wind chill. I don't remember much of that night, but I had a bit of clarity once my teammate injected me with a steroid used to combat altitude sickness. I was told I was developing high-altitude cerebral edema and I would die if I didn't descend. The problem was that a massive blizzard had come in. Even without the storm, helicopters could not get me. By morning, the storm had lessened a bit, and a guide from another team heard what had happened. He agreed to help me get down the mountain, but within an hour, the storm was raging again. I lost in the snow for a while, and my body was depleted of energy. I slumped down into a snowdrift, realizing I was going to die. I wasn't scared then, but felt a calm peacefulness. Thank God, something eventually kicked in. Some sort of survival instinct, and the sheer terror of the situation hit me hard. Thank God my guide followed my tracks, gave me more medicine, and over the next 7 hours, made our way down. The fear hit me really badly that night in base camp. That realization that I should be dead is harder to describe. I got severe sun, high altitude is weird, and wind burns on my face. Lost chunks of my cheeks for a while. I now have signs of having a TBI from my brain swelling. I still love the mountains, but I hike instead of mountaineering. My life is too precious now. When I saw someone try and jump off a bridge, only to be talked down as I was driving past and then change their mind and jump at exactly the moment I passed. One moment, they were there, and then I looked in my side mirror, they fell and were just gone, and there was nothing I could do about it. Earlier this year, while backing our truck up at night on a mountain road, our rear tire slipped off the road. The truck rolled twice down the side of the very steep mountain. We miraculously landed upright on a fire road below the road we'd been on originally. The moment the first tire went off the side, and I could feel us falling, was by far the scariest moment of my life. When I was 13, I was staying at a hotel in New York with my family and decided to get some hot chocolate in the lobby. When I went back to the elevator, there was already a man in it holding the door for me. He had pressed the button for a different floor than mine, and I pressed my floor. The whole time in there, he was just staring at me. When the elevator stopped at my floor, I got out. The man waited, but I had a weird feeling and noticed he had gotten out too, which immediately made me suspicious. I contemplated throwing my hot chocolate at him, but decided to just run to my parents' room. When he saw me knocking on the door, he went back in the elevator. Thinking back, I was extremely lucky that the hotel had open floors where each floor sort of looks down on the lobby. I'm sure if it was more closed, he would have done something. In the wee hours of a cold winter night in downtown Indianapolis, I, 24, was riding my bicycle home to the dorms, 2 miles from my job as a night cook. It sucked bad enough as it was that dry ice Indiana cold, but I had no car. A car full of predatory men start harassing me, driving alongside me, taunting me. They suddenly brake, and I take off of my bike through the tree-dotted university grounds, between some buildings and round back to the dorms. It happened at the perfect place, because they couldn't drive into that area with the trees. What if it happened a half a mile earlier? What if I had hesitated a second? I took a taxi home every night after work after that. The last 2 hours of every shift therefore went to cab fare, but I'm still alive. Those were hard times. My dog and I were walking on the border of a nature reserve forest. There were no paths in the deep, so we just walked on a field public path. My dog looks into the forest, and we see this crazed man looking back at us. I can't explain his expression. Stupidly, I said something, and they didn't respond, and just started to walk away. Me and my dog both just ran further down the path, and then I called one of the friends for comfort. Once I realized what he looked like and the expression on his face, a sudden wave of fear and anxiety came over me that I've never really felt. I wonder who that guy was. When my son was born, C-section, he stopped breathing. The doctors managed to revive him. It felt like 5 minutes of sheer panic, but in reality it was more like 30 seconds. I have the whole thing on video. I was recording when they lift him above the sheet and forgot to press stop on the recording. I watched the video back a couple of years later, and you can hear the panic in my voice. I asked the nurse if he was going to be okay, and she said she doesn't know. Luckily, 9 years later, he's a very healthy, happy boy. When I was a kid in 1973, I went fishing with my brother and cousin. We had to cross a low water bridge over the creek. It started raining pretty hard, and after a while, we thought we'd better head back. By this time, water was about hip deep over the bridge we had to cross back over, and it was really churning. We looked around and found a long branch that we all held onto as we crossed. About halfway across, I lost my footing and fell in, still holding on. This caused my cousin to fall in, and so my brother was left holding onto the branch with both of us in the water. In the meantime, our older sister showed up and found my brother's parked motorcycle with water now inching up the spokes. We couldn't hear anything but the roar of the swollen creek. A couple of police officers were now looking on. Sister, all 90 pounds of her, decided she'd better rescue us, so she came from her side of the bridge. When she got to us, the water swept her off, but she grabbed onto the branch. And at this point, brother is holding onto the branch with all 3 of us. We're beyond panicked in what was definitely a flash flood. If we let go, we'd be swept down the rocky creek bed to God knows where. We struggled to hang on. The cops finally removed their gun belts and came to our rescue. I really thought I was going to die that day. My brother is a hero. I was on final approach to a local airport and had chosen runway 26 to land because that's what you're supposed to do at this particular airport, unless the wind favors another runway. There was a 3-knot tailwind, and I should have landed the opposite direction on runway 8, but I thought, what the hell, I can basically fly straight in and it's only 3 knots. I'm running low on fuel, and I'm a student pilot flying solo, so I don't want to fly around the airport. I just want to get down and fill up. I get down to about 20 feet from the runway, and all of a sudden, I feel a gust of wind pick me up from behind, and the nose immediately points down. My lift is gone, so I'm basically falling to the ground. I instinctively yank back on the yoke, but there's no air flowing over the elevator, so I hit nose wheel first, and I thought the propeller hit too, but somehow it didn't, and sort of bounce forward into a precarious position where the left side wheel and nose wheel are touching the ground, and my right wheel is still 2 feet in the air. It looked like the left wing might drag on the ground if I didn't just front flip onto the runway. Not really sure how that ended up settling. I guess the wind just died down. Next thing you know, I'm stopped on the runway, and the airplane is violently shaking. I'm thinking I bent the prop shaft, and I'm violently shaking, adrenaline, and I rev up the engine a little bit to get going and get off the runway. The engine ended up running smoothly after a few seconds, and the shaking stopped. Unsure about what just happened and how the airplane could possibly be okay, I taxied to the fuel pump and shut down. It took me a few hours after I refueled, calming myself down, and then building up the courage to get back in the airplane and fly home. It is a 15-minute flight back to my home airport, and I did the whole thing white-knuckled and quivering, but I'm glad I did. I ended up having a great landing, and had I not gotten back on the horse that day, I may have never got my license. Still though, that moment when I lost control and all I could see out of the windshield was runway, scariest moment of my entire life. My husband forgot to close the baby gate at the top of our stairs, and I walked out of our bedroom to see our 10-month-old baby sitting right at the edge of the top step. When he turned to look at me, he lost his balance, and like a slow-motion horror story, he went over the edge and tumbled all the way down. I screamed and ran down after him and scooped him up to check him over. Thank God he was completely fine, and he even stopped crying after only like 2 minutes. I was so certain he was going to be seriously hurt. Terrifying. I once swam naked in the ocean, no land in sight, floating in that deep blue water, the abyss below me, cloudless sky above. It was the most terrifying feeling to be so vulnerable and small, but I was also excited and blissed out at the same time too. I still dream about that moment quite often. Sometimes it's a wonderful dream like I'm flying. Sometimes it's a nightmare where something big is coming up from beneath me. I was conducting a cell search, and 3 cartel members trapped me inside the cell by blocking the entrance. One of them held an improvised knife, shiv, and the other 2 proceeded to try to interrogate me on what I was taking. I took off my utility belt as a show that I wasn't going to be back down for a fight, and in doing so, slyly triggered the panic alarm on my radio, while simultaneously making it look like I was shutting the radio off. When the 3 saw that I was willing to fight to get out, they actually backed down and let me pass. Of course, by the moment about 10 plus officers were rushing to my location because I wasn't responding to my panic alarm. Far as I know, they believed my reinforcement showed up because the bubble officer, camera watcher, called the emergency after not being able to contact me on my radio and never knew I had secretly summoned a small army to rescue me in the event of being jumped. They even told me they thought it was pretty gutsy that I didn't back down while in the cell. And from that day onward, I never had any problems with them or their group. I once crawled into an abandoned World War II. I'll pause. I once crawled into an abandoned World War II Maginot Fortress through approximately 40 by 40 centimeter hole with a friend in France, and we descended maybe 2 stories below ground, down some stairs with only phones as flashlights. We walked around for like 20 minutes, but it was hard to breathe after some time, and we took a wrong turn on the way back. Almost got lost down there. We have a house near a lake we visit often in the summer. As soon as I could walk, my parents taught me how to swim and not to fear the water, and I'm really thankful for that. So, this incident happened when we were visiting that lake in the summer. There is a dock in the water roughly 2, 5, 3 meters deep. My family always goes up to the dock, and my parents usually sunbathe while me and my sister jump off the dock or play in the water. This time, my sister got bored, so I was the only one to jump off the deck. I used to collect clams and other stuff, so I would jump really high so my butt would touch the bottom and I could feel with my hands for a few seconds before coming up. The water was really murky and dark. You could only see a few centimeters down. Well, one time I felt something with my hands and couldn't grab it, so next time I jumped with my feet extended out, slurp. The murky, swamp-ass, slimy bottom of the lake slurped up my feet and I was stuck up to my knees. My first reaction was to put my hands up, but I couldn't reach out of the water. My sister didn't play with me, so she didn't watch me. The water is too dark to see me down there, and my parents are probably asleep or not worried because I'm a really good swimmer, and sometimes stay underwater to feel for clams. My heart started racing, but I needed to think logically. I sat down and opened my eyes. It was so dark. I truly felt I was alone. Fortunately, the thought of being in this horrible, dark world activated my logical thinking, and I started to dig out my feet as fast as I could. When I swam up at first, I thought I was swimming down because the world started to go dark. I got out just in time. I've had several scary moments in life, but personally the scariest was when I was sitting at a stoplight on my motorcycle in a turn lane waiting to make a left turn, when all of a sudden I was hit head-on by a dude in a pickup truck that had a full case of beer between himself and his girlfriend that they were sharing. I saw headlights coming straight at me, and there was nowhere for me to go because there was traffic to my right that I would have hit trying to get out of the way. Thought for sure I was a goner. He hit me hard enough that I flipped over the top of his truck and landed on my back behind it. He ran over my bike but got stuck. I remember thinking as I was flying through the air, what is that screaming sound? I found out later that it was the girl in the truck that was screaming. I was wearing full riding gear, and I actually was able to walk away from that without any injuries, and since that day, I've only rode a motorcycle once. I did lose my watch though, somehow.